Good morning, everybody. This is Jaqui Lane from the Book Advisor here, and I am chatting with Nancy Youssef today in the Book Advisor author interview. Nancy, hello. I'm actually in Adelaide at the moment, and you're in Sydney, so hello from Adelaide.
Good morning from bright sunny Sydney. We've finally got rid of all that rain, and good morning on a Monday morning, Jackie. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, that's an absolute pleasure. So thank you for taking out the time this morning. So I'd like to introduce everybody to Nancy. I first met Nancy back in 2019, yes, pre-COVID. Nancy had the first draft of her book and wasn't sure what to do next. What she did have, however, was a great title, a clear purpose, and a genuine desire to help others get clarity and confidence about what they wanted to really do with their lives and how to build financial security for themselves and their family. As a multi-award-winning finance broker and mentor, Nancy's book, Fear, Money, Purpose, is an open, honest exploration about how we deal with, or don't, money and financial matters. It's odd in a way. Most of us want financial security for ourselves and our family, but we're not taught this in school via our friends or family. One of life's most important skill sets is left to each of us to sort out. And a big part of sorting out is understanding our own relationship with money, what motivates us, scares us, intimidates us, and more. And I have to admit that in one of our early conversations about Nancy's draft, when I shared that I thought there was something missing from her story, I made Nancy cry. I didn't mean to, but it was a pivotal point for Nancy in terms of her book. And we've remained friends ever since. And I couldn't be more proud of what Nancy has grabbed hold of on her journey, and that she is sharing her experience and feelings and knowledge with others. So before we get into your book journey, Nancy, what are you currently working on in your business and in your life?
Well, I mean, a lot's changed, Jackie, since we met in 2019. There was a different world, and I think the year that the book went to publishing and was launched, not even 6 months later, we had a completely different world. And so a lot of that has forced me to go back to my own businesses, and I've had a finance broking business for close to 20 years. And in that business, I've transitioned really off the day-to-day. All I really do in that business now is finance strategy and work with a few clients in hand-holding them towards their own property and finance goals. So I don't spend a lot of time there anymore, as they say, off the tools. But that's made room for my mentoring business, which I founded about 12 years ago now. And like most businesses, during COVID, I had to look at what the opportunities were because predominantly pre-COVID, that business was very hands-on, face-to-face mentoring in boardrooms and working with a lot of new entrants into the finance broking space. Since then, I've now pivoted a little bit, not so much, I don't sort of say pivot, I've adapted to what I saw were opportunities in our own industry to help more established brokers as opposed to small businesses that were starting up, in really solving two problems, or two challenges, I should say. One is, how do I scale and elevate into my business into more of a leadership and really run a business rather than being on the tools where I've bought myself a job. And the second is really going into these businesses and helping them set and establish good structures and foundations to be able to find their own purpose, and then ultimately why they're in business in the first place, with a pathway to what an exit or an eventual handing over the reins would mean for them. So I'm really excited in that journey. Outside of that, I'm really looking at building up and have been building my speaking business, and just doing a bit of consulting. So yes.
There you go. Yeah, you haven't been idle during COVID by the sounds of things.
Oh, who could afford to be idle? I mean, while everything was going on TV, I was just thinking, how are we going to survive post-COVID? So
yeah. So interesting, just before we started this, if you could hold up your book is called Fear, Money, Purpose, How to Overcome Your Fears to Financial Freedom and Your True Purpose. Well, I know that this came out kind of before and in COVID, but boy, it's probably more relevant today than ever. So take us back if you can. What was the motivating factor for you to write and then publish your book? Because often writing and publishing are two quite different things.
I think, well, if I look back on where I was at in 2017, 2018, firstly, becoming an author was always a lifelong dream of mine. As a young 14-year-old, I decided in a school library one afternoon, I was the nerd that used to love going into the library at lunchtime. I loved the smell of books. I loved being surrounded by books. I was an avid reader. I'd stay up to 4 a.m. some mornings because I'd be stuck in a really good book. And I decided back then that I'd be an author one day, just didn't know when, where, or how. In 2017, I'd been fortunate enough to go on a philanthropic trip to Africa. And it was on this trip that, I sort of really started to reflect on my own journey, my own business journey, seeing so many people in impoverished communities and what they were able to achieve just with some tools and a little bit of help. Got me coming back in, really reassessing everything I was doing. And so I realized at that point I'd been on a bit of a journey and I felt that one thing that had held me back a lot in business was fear. And when I started to reflect on a lot of the conversations I've had with my own finance clients and my own startup clients in both businesses, what I found were I'd look at the ones that would really succeed and the ones that were, taking a little bit of time to get there. And a lot of their decisions were always laced around this thing called fear. And no different to me. And I started to think about this, and it's typical in a lot of small businesses. And so I realized at that point that, I was going through a lot of change myself at the time. And I thought, it's time that I actually put pen to paper and just start writing. I didn't think I'd have a book a year and a half later, but I just sort of started to write and thought, well, what's involved? And what do I need to do in my own business to start following a lot of what I want to achieve in terms of goals? And so the book was a starting point. It was almost, I won't say therapy, but it was almost like a way to just get everything out of my head into a story and with some help and a really good project management team around me, Fear, Money, Purpose started to take shape. So yeah, it was a really awesome journey. I loved it.
Right, it's a nice.
When you meet someone like Jaqui who shreds you and makes you cry, and I must say, I cried because of fear more than anything else, and I had to just prove you wrong. It was like, Jaqui, I'm the fear queen. I've written about fear, and now you're making me scared at how vulnerable I need to be in this book. So yes,
I'm still apologising, and I didn't mean to make Nancy cry.
So you touched a chord.
yeah. And tell me, on a practical basis, how much time did you have to commit, if you can make that distinction, over the whole process of writing and then publishing and then marketing your book? Because the time factor is often the thing that a lot of potential business authors are quite trepidatious about.
Yeah, and I think, the book itself was, I think, about 9 or 10 chapters. And so never having published a book before and having a lot of authors around me, everyone was giving me their own opinion. And so I was kind of getting drawn into this conversation and then this one and then this one. And I was just trying to learn as much as I could, not so much just about the writing journey. I mean, writing the book was probably the easier part. Yeah. It was everything else around publishing, self-publishing or publishing or, how do you market? There was so many things I hadn't thought about. And so it was a really steep learning curve. But in terms of actually writing the book, I had to commit time each month. Actually each week I'd have a bit of a meeting about it. We'd work on a chapter by chapter basis. But it took a good, 8 or 9 months of writing. And that was whilst I was learning everything else around what would happen when the book was finished.
Yeah, great point. And I was chatting with someone the other day about that, about the whole process. And I said, the reality is kind of researching and writing your book's really about a third of the whole journey. And people get focused on the writing part because they don't know the rest of it. So that's really good feedback from you. And as we've already briefly mentioned, I call your book a COVID book, baby. What were the particular challenges, apart from the screamingly obvious, about actually kind of launching a book into that weird time of COVID, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I mean, the book went to market in July of 2019. We then had a 3-month PR campaign straight after it to get it out into media and different channels. At that time, I was so busy with interviews and podcasts and writing and magazines and all the rest of it. So it was a very busy time, and that took me through till about the end of 2019. But it was a great process because it set me up for all these things to happen in 2020, of which one was an international retreat, followed by a little bit of a book tour. And so I had booked a ticket to be going off to Europe to run a retreat in Croatia in July of the following year. And unfortunately, COVID hit, and from February we were stuck. And so I was just absolutely, devastated and disappointed that my plan, like the plans that I had for an overseas launch, didn't quite go to plan. It was also challenging because COVID, if you recall, consumed us all. It was just, everyone was glued to case numbers today, how many people were infected. It was just media all around. And I think the challenges for all businesses at the time were, how are we going to survive this period? What are we going to do with our teams? How do we have everyone working from home? And so being sensitive to what was going on in the market was also, it felt like it wasn't really the time to be self-promoting a book about fear at that point, although the topic was relevant. And I thought I couldn't have picked a better topic right now with the amount of fear there are and how many decisions are being made from a place of fear right now. How much, how many people are staying awake at night, fearful that, their businesses were going to fold, or, cash flow and money and paying the bills. And so the topic was super relevant, but in being sensitive to also not wanting to self-promote as such, although it wasn't really a self-promotion, I had to just sort of pause. And that was a big challenge for me, is that I just had planned for so long to just go full throttle with the book. And it was just literally for 12, nearly 18 months, we just had to, occasionally put something out there, but I couldn't go in at the full intensity that I had planned.
Yeah. And I guess, it's very challenging to get that balance right, and very much a personal decision by you. Now, you hold your book up again. So Nancy, for somebody who's wanting a bit of a synopsis of the book, what are the 4 most important aspects of the book, or 3 or 4 most important aspects of the book? And why would somebody buy it?
Well, I guess I'd say probably 4. I've got 3 pillars in the book, which are fear, money, and purpose. And at the end of each chapter, we've got summaries of what each chapter is about, which makes it a really easy book to read. People say, is it a motivational book? Is it a money book? Is it a finance book, or is it a business book? And I think it's a mix of all of those things, because it draws on a personal experience of me sharing my own, as I say, if there's a mistake to be made in business, I've made it. If there's good decisions to make, I've made them. If there's awful decisions, I've made them. So I share a lot of that journey, but also with the thousands of conversations I've had with clients over the years. The biggest thing are, if you want another perspective, I think, in how another small business owner went from being what I call small business mindset of holding and controlling everything in that business, to finally being able to identify my fears and how I went through a process to overcome them. That's one. If anyone is looking for, case studies or examples, it's all in there. And ultimately, the whole book guides you into what I call the purpose finishing piece, where, a few things where you can reflect in yourself on, well, why am I in business, and what am I trying to achieve, and what's holding me back, and what are the decisions I'm making today that are ultimately blocking me from getting to that next pivotal point in my business journey. And so that's really what it's almost like, hey, I've got your back. I know what you're going through. I've been through it too. And this is my story and some of my clients' stories as to how, we went on our own fear journey and have ended up in a place, working from a place of purpose. And I don't think you ever wake up and go, yep, I've nailed it and job's done. No, I think in any business, it's always evolving. but being mindful of what are those things that are taking over your mind in terms of decisions, particularly when it comes to money fear in business, is probably why you would buy the book.
Interesting, great insight, Nancy. And I think, I've been in a small business and various ones thereof, and I think the biggest fear in business is cash flow.
Absolutely. Hey, even I still have that challenge. But yes, I understand.
And so and I think the other really interesting thing that I'd share also is that for a lot of small business people, they often kind of fall into their business and don't have a kind of network of business people necessarily around them, and often tend to think that the way they feel and what they're experiencing is just them, that nobody's kind of had these challenges before. So I think your book's really useful, and the point of view is that it shares your journey and those of some of your clients, and that people who are ready can really understand that they're not alone, that they can join me and you and thousands of others who have been dealing with all the sorts of challenges that they deal with every day.
Well, typically one answer, and I mean, I do a lot of mentoring, and as I said, I work with a lot of business owners, and one of the first questions I ask is, why did you start a business? And back to your point of why how people fall into business. And a lot of them will say very similar answers, left a corporate role or left a job or started a business to do three things: to be flexible, to have freedom to make decisions and be the boss, and to be financially better off. And when I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you rating in each of these areas? It's actually really interesting how many people find that they have not achieved any of those things running a business, which is quite sad, given that, even in our own Australian economy, over 65% of our economy is underpinned by small business operators. It could even be more than that now, I'd say. I'm not going to quote statistics, but I think certainly a big chunk of our community is underpinned by small business operators. And if they're operating from a place where on a scale of 1 to 10 across those three areas, they're not fulfilled, well, how many business owners are really struggling these days?
And I think a lot, and there's, we can have a whole conversation around operating a business in an environment of great uncertainty. So moving along a bit, so I'm going to ask you some questions, again, coming back to the writing journey. What was the hardest part for you about writing your book?
I think the hardest part was realizing after that terrible conversation with you where you made me cry, Jaqui. I'm going to keep, now you've let everyone know I cried in front of you. I'm going to bring it back to you because you made me cry. But I think having realized how vulnerable I needed to actually be, I think the first manuscript I'd released was good, but it didn't hit the chord in terms of what my title was and what I was trying to achieve. So writing a book is quite a personal thing, and I think having to go vulnerable and share as much as I did was probably the main challenge. And the other would have been navigating all the other moving parts of writing a book that I just didn't know in their intricate detail what would be required.
And in terms of marketing your book, and again, you were lucky to kind of get it out before COVID. What did you do before your actual book launch and then after the book launch? And what has been the most effective way for you to kind of market your book?
So I've been the bad child along the way a couple of times, but I think the biggest thing was obviously, Jaqui, with your program, that sort of definitely put a little bit more of a structure in terms of my approach to marketing. And, you kind of reined it in, and sort of there was a process to follow where I just thought it was more about getting out there and just having it on social media and, promoting it through, I thought, publishing would take care of a lot of that. And what I realized is it doesn't. Publishing does its, publishers do their thing, but there's so much that you've got to do even before that book hits the shelves, in terms of where do you want it to show, who's your target market, what's the demographic you're looking at, what mediums are you going to be focusing on, why, again, it was the whole why would anyone buy it, why would anyone So a lot of, difficult answers, but I think definitely in marketing it, where it's been really beneficial is from an industry perspective. I've marketed a lot within my own finance industry, also within a lot of entrepreneur network groups. LinkedIn has been a great medium, and social media, obviously, word of mouth, and then speaking. I think at a lot of the speaking events that I do, the book is mentioned a lot of the time, being an author.
Great. And here's maybe a tricky question. Of all the things you've done, what wouldn't you do again, or what would you do differently?
I'd probably spend, and I think this would be good for book 2, because that's something that's on the cards.
Yeah.
I would definitely spend more time in the strategy up front as to what, a bit more deliberate, a bit more strategic. It's great to have a topic. It's great to have a title. It's great to have a story and messages, but being more strategic in where and how to market it up front, because then you're not having to go back and fill a lot of the gaps, 6 or 8 months or a year later, and hopefully have the crystal ball that tells me that no other pandemic is going to hit or any other world disaster. So yes.
Yeah, great insight there. And you've mentioned that you're now kind of on a speaker. So how have you leveraged your book to get speaking gigs, and how do you leverage it in the speaking gigs that you get?
Well, I mean, it's always, being an author is always, it gives you a little bit more, authority, and you're sort of more elevated as a subject expert within what you do, particularly from an industry perspective. I believe authors also, the fact that you do share your story is great, because you can make reference to a lot of that in your keynote and your message. So you're known for a particular topic. We all, a lot of the time we say it. I mean, a book is really an enlarged business card for what you actually do. So outside of my desire to spread a message and share and experience share, I think having a book also gives you a little bit more credibility.
Certainly does that. Mm-hmm. And again, taking you back, to 2018, 90, what was your primary goal for the book? And now looking back, 2.5, 3 years, do you feel like you've achieved it, or that you're still working on it?
Oh, look, I think any author comes out and you just dream that your book's going to be across all these bookshelves and you're going to sell thousands and thousands and thousands of copies, and everyone's going to be an instant, out there. And I think looking back now, that was probably a little bit naive, because the book really has done so much more outside of just being on a bookshelf or how many copies it's selling or sold. I think now where I look at it is it's firstly, more than anything, it's a personal goal that I've achieved. So something that was on the bucket list. So that always feels good. But definitely the amount of feedback I've had from people who've read it, and how their insights and what it meant to them and what it meant for them and what changes it made them think about, or what inspiration they've gauged from it, that has, catapulted into decisions and actions and things that they've decided to go and do that they may not have done before. And so that, I think, is when every time I get one, even up until a couple of weeks ago, somebody reached out and shared what they got out of the book. And it always makes me feel really good that it's touched somebody in one way, or it's resonated, or it's, there's a call to action that's happened as a result of reading it.
Yeah, it's got to make you feel good, doesn't it?
It does. You get all warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, you do, and very much so. Was there something surprising about the book journey that happened that you didn't expect?
And I don't mean to say this in a bad way. I just thought, because I'm obviously a female author and I've written this book, and a lot of it's come from a female business owner's perspective, the amount of blokes who've loved it that have come out and said to me, do you know, I have felt that feeling that you talk about in chapter, I think 3 or 4, about imposter syndrome. I just didn't know there was a term for it. I felt that before. And so it's been surprising how many, male business owners have opened up and actually said, hey, reading it really resonated with me, and I didn't realize there was this term or those things. But more than anything, I think, no, I mean, it's really touched a lot of people, and I think that's what I've been very pleased with.
And I think that's also an interesting thing around that whole discussion. And I mean, you've worked with me, and there's plenty of other people have too. And, you know, I'm really very much focused on target audience and focus. But I'm always saying, look, you know, just because we're focusing on a particular target audience doesn't mean your book's not relevant to others. It's just that you can't market to everybody, you can't engage everybody, but you're not excluding others by doing that.
And I think if I look back, what I perceive to be my target audience, but the people who've actually read it that I might have excluded or didn't focus so much on it, a large chunk of them have actually liked it and embraced it.
Yeah.
I think the most surprising thing was recently in London to have, you know, somebody on the other side of the world that I handed a copy to, and he read it within a day and literally orders 100 copies the next day that they want signed. And it was just such a compliment. And I was so grateful that, you know, something like this actually happened, unplanned, very spontaneously while I'm on a vacation in Europe and in London, running around trying to organise a book signing of 100 copies.
Yeah.
And it's been embraced by a lot of the key players in the finance industry. So
it's fantastic. And you know, a great thing too, because, you know, we're talking end of 2022 and you launched it in July 2019. So just shows kind of, I guess, the relevance and longevity of what you've written, which is fantastic.
Fear must be taboo, Jaqui. It doesn't either.
Hey, look, thank you for those really interesting insights to your journey and the good and challenging parts of it. I've got a little bit of a light-hearted quiz that I like to run everybody through at the end of this thing. So are you up for that?
Be a surprise. Thank you. Hopefully I'll be able to answer them.
Okay, they're not too hard.
Okay.
It's a bit like hard quiz, except on books. And I've got more hair than the host of hard quiz. So first question, how do you read? Are you ebook or print book?
Print book, absolutely.
Oh, there we go. And best place for reading, couch, bed, or somewhere else?
Couch, 100%.
Marking books. Do you mark books at all? Are you a page folder, or do you write in books, or do you use Post-it notes?
Post-it notes, like keeping the books neat.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm a folder and a Post-it note person. Reading style. Do you read a few, skip a few, or do you read from beginning to end?
Beginning to end.
Yeah, I knew there's a reason I liked you. Outside of business and learning, are you a fiction or non-fiction reader?
I just wish I had time to read a lot these days, but if I did have time, I would read fiction.
You got a favourite author?
Not in recent times. I read a lot of business books and I love a lot of biographies. So I do tend to read a lot of biographies.
Yeah. Sharing books. Are you a hoarder or a giver?
A hoarder, 100%.
And writing style. So you'll know what this means. So for those who don't, Australian English is different from American English and slightly different from English, which we call Oxford English. So what's your preferred writing style?
If I look at Fear, Money, Purpose, everyone that's read the book has said they almost hear me talking in the background. So I'd say that's what, conversational. Is that Australian?
Yeah, that's conversational Australian, yeah.
Pretty much, that's me.
There you go. And that's an interesting thing in itself, because when I'm often working with people, you know, it's a question I ask them. And clearly a lot of people don't know, but and most people who haven't written a book tend to have a combination and are not even aware that they've borrowed words or spellings from completely different kind of areas, which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. So there you go. That's the quiz. You survived that okay. I don't have a big mug to give you, but you have survived.
But the reason I hoard those books is also I get gifted so many from authors. So I just say anyone that's willing or wanting to write a book, just go for it. You've got nothing to lose. Call Jaqui, because honestly, she could have saved, if I had called her in the beginning, I would have saved myself a lot of time.
Yeah, well, and the delightful thing about this conversation is that you're thinking about writing another book, and in listening to some of your responses, I can hear my advice to you from the first one. So something must have stuck.
Oh, it absolutely has. You weren't going to allow it not to. So
yeah. Oh, look, Nancy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time out on a Monday morning, because often it's really a busy time to set up the week. So thank you again for all your great insight, and hope your current book continues to go well, and look forward to when you start writing and then publish your second book.
Thank you so much, Jaqui. It's been an honor, and I really appreciate you having me on the show. So thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Oh, we sure will. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Have a good day.
There we go.